Welcome to a Celtic State of Mind. I'm John Dykes, and today, once again, I'm delighted to be joined by Stevie Mullen. Welcome back to the studio, Stevie.
Thanks for having me, Paul. Good afternoon.
Well, it's always a pleasure to see you at State of Mind Studios, Stevie. And it's the day after another victory, it's got to be said. I think I was talking to you previously about did Lenny get it right? Well, if you win the game, you've got it right. But it wasn't a very inspiring performance, was it?
No, I think we need to go back to Saturday and compare both games. The lineups changed. I thought we'd done quite well on Saturday. Great 5-0 victory in a difficult place. But to make 4 changes from that, you know, and one of the comments that Neil made prior to the game was he was wanting to inject a bit of pace. As somebody in the house who's never seen him run, I'd love to know how fast Greg Taylor could run against Jeremy Frimpong. You know, so I didn't see any pace brought into the team last night that would inject a bit of enthusiasm into us, because I thought we were very laborious last night.
It was laboured. It definitely was laboured. I mean, I was watching the game and I made the comment last night again, Stevie, in relation to the performance against Kilmarnock, where you are playing against packed defences, but should it even be a complaint? Because you're going to come up against a lot of teams that will play like that. In fact, on Saturday against Livingston, we'll face that again. The key factor on Saturday will be the fact that we're playing at Celtic Park and we've got the wide wings to use, which we'll use effectively, and we were able to overcome Hamilton, who, you know, play a defensive game. Kilmarnock played defensively at Rugby Park, and I expected St Mirren to do the same, and they did. So you're looking at that, the actual the second half, and you're thinking, right, how are we going to break them down? And it's going to come down to a moment of creative brilliance or a good delivery. And the good deliveries, unfortunately, for some reason, dried up at half-time from Ryan Christie. I was very complimentary about him at half-time, and then he reverted back to the deliveries ending up out the pitch. So, yeah, we're going to come up against that a lot, though, Stephen. I think that's why the lead question that I'm running with today: should Neil Lennon bring Paddy Roberts back to Celtic Park? Now, I've mentioned Paddy time and time again on this podcast to the point where people are telling me to get over Paddy Roberts. I still see him as a viable target. What's your thoughts on that? I know we've got a lot of creativity already. Would Paddy do anything to unlock defences like St Mirren last night?
Well, excuse me, I think if you're looking at last night's performance, and we'll take that in isolation, myself and some of the other guys who come onto the show stick up for Greg Taylor as much as we possibly can. Greg Taylor's a £2 million player. Paddy Roberts would be a £2 million player if he came to Celtic. Greg Taylor, last night, I didn't see him create one chance. I didn't see him put one cross on. Every time he got the ball, he either turned back or turned defensively, or the ball was flying over his head for Shane Duffy passes. Put Paddy Roberts in that situation, he's going to take defenders out of the game, because if he goes by one, he's going to draw guys out the middle. I think if Paddy Roberts was available at that sort of money, I think it's a no-brainer. I think we need to get away the £12 million player. He's not coming to us as a £12 million player. He'll be coming as a £2 million player with comparable wages that I think would be a much better option than, for example, some of the guys you were talking about yesterday, like Tom Rogic. I would rather have Paddy on that money, who's going to provide something, than Tom, who doesn't provide anything currently. Yeah,
and again, we had that discussion, and I know that you tune in, Stevie, the discussion being, we've got a couple of players who you regard as first team players because they've been part and parcel of the team for so long now, in Lee Griffiths and Tom Rogic. Isn't it about time that we had them in a jersey? Isn't it about time that they were earning the wages? Or is it time that the wages were put elsewhere? And I think when you're looking at Paddy Roberts, I see Paddy, and I'm going to come to some of the points that are coming through. I do see him as a creative player. I think what he found at Celtic, particularly in his first spell, although his second spell was hampered by injury, as a club that fitted him. He fitted Celtic, and Celtic suited him as well. He's tried various other clubs, Girona, Middlesbrough, Norwich. It's not really worked out for him at any of those 3 clubs. He's never going to break into the Man City team. I think from a career perspective, it would be a good move for him. I think we can give him a platform that would allow him even to move on in 3 years. And he would have far more options at that stage if he comes to us and he plays European football in a winning side. The reaction that I'm going to get, I think, will be mixed, and I will have a look at the comments and read as many of them out as possible. I think it will be mixed because people are maybe looking at the Celtic side at the moment and focusing on, for example, one of the players we've spoken about, Greg Taylor. Yeah, we certainly need a new left back, be that for cover or as a first choice. But I also think there's room for another creative player, especially when you see last night Forrest, who scored the winning goal, and I'm going to speak about Forrest as well because he takes a lot of stick, so when he's scoring winning goals, we've got to mention that. And normally I would expect to see on the other side someone like Christie crafting chances. He set up the 2 goals. I don't think that's his ideal position. I don't really know what Ryan Christie wants out of Celtic at the moment, if he's still viewing a move as his best option. And I think Paddy Roberts comes in and gives us another option on either wing, which is important. He can switch, just like Forrest.
I think you get something else that maybe we haven't considered in the other teams that he's been on loan to. If he comes to Celtic, he's going to be in a team that's got at least 70% possession in most of the domestic games. So his avenue for getting the ball, the amount of times he'll be on the ball, is going to increase greatly for these other clubs as well, who maybe gets on the ball 3-4 times in the whole match. And he's got to try and create something in each and one of them, or he'll be viewed as their spectators and their management team as he wasn't productive a day. Mm-hmm. So if he creates 3 or 4 chances out of 25 for Celtic, then he's going to be able to do that. He's got that ability. There's no doubt the boy's a talented player. Yeah.
You also look at the possession Celtic have, Stevie. You look at the game last night, it was almost exclusively in the last third of the pitch, Celtic trying to break down a Park defence constantly. He's the type of guy, as you say, who can thrive in that environment. He's maybe not been in that environment since he left Celtic last time round. So when we're looking at, for example, a striker coming to Celtic like Scott McDonald from Motherwell, who domestically was a decent enough striker, he ended up scoring 32 goals one season. We're going to give him a platform and an opportunity to thrive at what he's good at. And it's not as though we're looking at a player who did well for us when he was 23 and he's now 29. You know, he was a massive name as a teenage player. He done well for us when he was in his early 20s. He can come back now and actually start rebuilding his career.
If he can hold the position for wide guys, when you're going to be playing against the formations that we've played against this whole season, mm-hmm. You've got to be really disciplined as your wide guy to stay wide, because you want to come in and take a defender inside with you. You can't do that. You need your centre forward to come out a wee bit to bring guys out the middle. You can't have your midfielders getting in too early. Mm-hmm. I think Paddy Roberts would have that discipline because he wants to trick by a guy. He's not a winger who wants to play at centre forward. It's even last night, we didn't look particularly balanced on the left-hand side of the park last night with Callum McGregor and Greg Taylor. Callum's coming in more and more into the centre, even towards the end of the game. Greg Taylor's starting to come in a wee bit and you're thinking, is he a natural left-back? Is he started in his career as a winger? Is he a midfielder? Because he didn't seem comfortable because he wasn't creating anything. So then he was coming in to try and get involved in the game.
You know, what I like to do is I like to throw out the question and then have a look to see what people are thinking out there, Steve. And we've got literally hundreds of people commenting on these broadcasts every day, which is brilliant. Before I go and do that, there's a couple of wee points that we like to make, because we try and engage as much as possible on Twitter as well. And, you know, you do some great work at St Roch's that we've spoken about with Rock Talk. And you and I had a great discussion before we came on air about mental health and how, you know, even day to day on a normal basis, it's something we need to continually view as something that someone might be suffering at your workplace or in your home, and what we need to do is to talk about it. You know, there's some great initiatives out there, Rock Talk being one of them. We've both got our Time to Tackle books here as well, Aaron Conley, which you kindly gave me. And, you know, we do get a lot of good feedback on that, don't we? And people who have been affected by suicide, for example. And we got a great comment during the week, didn't we?
Yep, after we spoke about Suicide Prevention Day last Thursday, I was contacted through the show by Sean O'Farrell, who thanked us for speaking about suicide in the podcast. He lost his dad, Sean, to a bad mental health situation in 2003. Sean describes his dad as a Celtic fan, a big ox of a man who couldn't run away from his troubles. Mm-hmm. So this probably wouldn't be the vision that most people would have for somebody who would complete suicide. But it affects all people for all walks of life, rich, poor, working, homeless. So it's something that we need to tackle It's something we'll bring up on the show. We won't labour the point, but just wish to Sean all the best. He thinks about his dad every day, and to reiterate to him, the illness kills your dad, Sean. Sean Senior didn't kill himself. No,
you're absolutely right. It's so important, I think, Stevie, for people to realise that this is something that's invisible to a lot of people. And some of the people who are suffering from depression, for example, anxiety, they hide it well. They've taught themselves how to hide it. And even people who are very close to them, their closest, the nearest and dearest, often can't identify it. But look out for signs. Look out for signs. I mean, the big one for me is being aware of people who, and I've mentioned on the podcast before, a chap who I was close to at a stage in my life ended up hanging himself. And his brother did the same. And it was tragic. And it was tragic for the family. Would I ever in a million years have thought that might have happened? No chance. And it's trying to identify things like, sometimes people seem aloof or they're antisocial, etc. They don't want to come out. They don't want to answer their phone even. It could be something as simple as that.
There's all sort of manners. I've asked this gentleman before from Rock Talk if I can share his story, although I won't give his name. Quite a successful guy in his business, but he worked alone. So when he would go to work, he was in rooms, houses himself, and the isolation was bringing him down. Mm-hmm. But he'd 4 different masks, and that's a term that comes into these conversations regularly. A mask for getting up in the morning with his wife and his kid. A mask when he went into the house to maybe meet the people who owned the house. Then he would have his periods of isolation and desolation that were bringing him confidence, and his mood's down. Then going home when the kids were coming in for school, another mask. Mm-hmm. One for sitting watching the TV at night with the family, and then the mask would come on when he was going to his bed when he'd be lying in tears. So it's not all people who are unemployed or in social deprivation. This guy's bang on it. Good company.
Yeah.
But he's covering it up by this mask.
Mm-hmm. I think using that terminology, the mask as well, they can put a smile on it, Stevie. So I'm not an expert on it. If anyone's watching this who's affected by any mental health issues whatsoever, or you're worried about somebody else, we can certainly put them in touch with the experts as well, Stevie. So we're always open to that, and we're all over social media, so you can get in touch anytime you wish. Now, I had said before, and I'm going to come to these comments that are coming through on Facebook, Twitter and YouTube. I'd asked the question, should Neil Lennon bring Paddy Roberts back to Celtic Park? I'm going to say yes. I don't think it's a deal that would be a breaker in terms of the finance that it would take to bring him to the club. And I think it would give us more creative options as we move into the 5 tournaments that we're competing in this season. I also think it would open the door for Neil Lennon maybe to move on some players who are surplus to requirements. And I've already been speaking about Tommy Roderick this week and Lee Griffiths. Was there anything from the press conferences this week that gave you confidence that Lee might be back in the squad at all, Stevie?
I've got to be honest, Paul, when I hear you and Kevin talking, I think you've got a sanctuary for wounded animals at your houses. Dogs with 1 leg and cats with 2 ears, or you just want to keep everybody, and make sure birds with broken wings and that. Sometimes we've got to just cut our losses with guys.
Yeah.
Lee played 2 games in last August and didn't reappear till January. Mm-hmm. He missed 5 months of last season. Scored 11 goals in that time. 3 was in the last game against, I think it was St Mirren.
Yeah.
But we missed Lee for 5 months of the year last year. We've now started this season. We're getting into, he's only played 30 minutes against Hibernian in 1 pre-season game, mm-hmm. and not been available. We all want what's best for Lee Griffiths. When does Lee Griffiths decide what's best for Celtic and his career? Mm-hmm. Because we can't constantly always be relying on going, he's going to come back. Because the longer he's out, the harder it's going to be to come back and compete to help Celtic in this crusade for 10 in a row.
Mm-hmm. I guess if I was to be given the option, Stevie, of Paddy Roberts plus a new left back, against the argument I was making during the week, Tommy Roderick and Lee Griffiths, I'd go for the former. I'd go for a left back and Paddy Roberts at this moment in time.
I would love to see somebody else. And again, if we're going to play 3-5-2, which would be my favoured position, I would rather just have somebody who can be defensively minded on the left-hand side of the park. I don't think... well, maybe Greg Taylor would be able to do that if he wasn't expected to attack.
Yeah.
He can't help us in an attacking. We've got Elyounoussi who could play there, who could maybe do the offensive side of it. Is he going to do the defensive side? Because if you watch last night's game, Christopher Ayer is making the marauding runs into the centre of the park. But when you're out of position, we've got nothing on the left. You know, we've got a real vulnerability. I know Kevin was criticised a wee bit at the weekend for saying the word woeful. I think maybe just his adjective was a bit too strong. But he had the real valid points when he was explaining why he had used that.
Yeah.
And it's to do with the defensive frailties. And they were shown last night. That, I'm not saying they're all coming from the left back. But for example, John Kennedy has now been involved at Celtic for nearly 15 years in a coaching capacity. We were all saying when he came in, he's a defensive coach, and we were complaining about corners. We're conceding goals for corners. We're looking a wee bit shaky for free kicks. Well, 15 years later, we still conceded a goal last night. It's hard to get the complete setup when you're watching on the TV because we're not allowed into the games. But when you're trying to stop it and have a wee look, it looks as if we were playing a hybrid formation defensively between zonal marking and man marking. Certainly a good delivery in the first half for their goal. But 5 players in the Celtic defence were taken out with one flicked on header. Ryan Christie comes off the back post and the guy's got a tap in. 20 minutes later, they get their second corner from the other side of the park and they won a header. That's the problems that we sat here and identified against Hamilton Accies when we won 5-0.
Yeah.
They've no changed. Until we set up differently or we're organised better, we're always going to have that frailty. Now, I'm not saying that's all coming for Greg Taylor, but it's something we need to target. And if we're going to be in a game where you're going to face more competitive players, we've got to be set up better. You know, and I heard Colin last night, you know, after criticising the guys yesterday afternoon, saying about Julien's dropped in because it's a characteristic and he can't play against big centre forward. Where did that come from? He said 1.5 bad games on 4G parts against tall centre forwards. That would be no reason to drop him last night.
Well, the big thing again, looking at the European, I'm now thinking of European fixtures. So you're talking about an issue there defensively, and I would be more worried when we're into the European campaign, because you are coming up against a higher calibre of player. Of course you are. But a lot of these guys are also big, athletic, powerful, imposing centre forwards. At that level they are. And, you know, I think some of Julien's best games for Celtic have been in Europe. I think he's a commanding figure. It concerns me a wee bit that we've got Duffy, Ayer and Julien and we can't command our own box. And I'm hoping that as a you know, result of them bonding, blending together, and the goalkeeper becoming used to the front three, because I would much prefer that myself, the front three being the 3 centre-halves in front of the goalie, then it should improve. That's what I would like. And the coaching aspect of it, I totally agree with you. I'm hoping that Shane Duffy's going to be that man in the middle to actually pull that together. That's what I hope. And I know he's only played a couple of games. What was your thoughts on Duffy, just on the point of centre-halves and organising that defence?
If I could just answer, if we're going to be drawing up partnerships, you need to play games together. So we started on Saturday with Duffy, Julien and Ayer. Played him again last night. You've got to get used to how these guys play. When we started on Saturday, I've got to be honest, I was really shocked to see Duffy at the right-hand side of the three, because I thought he'd have been the pivot. And again, just because, in his own words, he's a bit short. So they always tell you, if you can as a forward, take the centre forward or the centre half out of his comfort zone, which is wide. So that's where he was getting dragged, because Frimpong on Saturday was further up the park, and on a few occasions Shane Duffy was taking out in the middle, something. Just let him sit in the middle and the other guys can do the work. Then as he plays in, we'll get where he's best suited. Might be the right side of the three, but I thought he would have been the pivot with the other 2 guys on either side of him.
Yeah.
So last night, I think he's a commanding player, but when I'd made the point last week about the concentration levels, I seen something in football last night that I've never seen before, and that's very rare because usually I've seen it. We were defending 15 metres inside St Mirren's half last night when we were attacking. For our second goal, and this is, again, it's a real bugbear in me. I like things to be disciplined, you play a position. In the lead up to our second goal, 2 or 3 central defenders were playing 1-2s at the right-hand side of the St Mirren box before it goes to the other side of the park for Ryan Christie to put in. How can you defend in any game against any team when that's the occasion? We put out against Ferencváros, it's 1-2 up the park and we're dead, we're left man and man.
Yeah.
We can't make ourselves that vulnerable.
In a game like last night, when we've already shown our defensive frailty, Stevie, as you say, that one punt up the park puts us under immense pressure. You're then looking at a situation where it is a defender facing his own goalkeeper. When that happened against Ferencváros, and I'm looking at El Hamid, normally I'm quite confident with him. I was surprised that he wasn't able to deal with that. And I've said before, at one point, the ball's on his toe. He could do anything with it. He plays it back in front of the striker. So you're absolutely right. We are playing a game where we'll come away for that last night. It's 2-1. But after the Ross County performance, and in particular the result, I would have liked to have seen more of a balanced formation game to game. It seems as though we're changing it. And not just for changing's sake, because players need to get games and players need to get time and minutes. But when someone's playing well and developing a partnership, try and hone that, try and develop it, particularly in defence. And that's my biggest issue with last night. I'm not going to criticise Neil Lennon today. I did that the day after Ferencváros because I blamed Neil Lennon's team selection for the result. But today I'm happy that we got the 3 points, but it was a lot more difficult than it should have been.
I think with Neil's words, it's great 3 points, great 3-1. You back up the M8, you can go top of the league at the weekend. But I think it would be unfair to dismiss everything. Your own points are relevant, and think everything was rosy in the garden last night. I thought what was great, was the substitutes bench. To have that quality, you could actually have just put all them in. But I think you've got to pick and choose. I've heard this term used quite a lot for Scott Brown, that he's our holding midfielder. And it's something I totally disagree with. And the reason why I disagree with is I think he's our most deep-lying midfielder. But a holding midfielder, if you're going to go back to how it's used, it was by Makalele and Didier Deschamps, who didn't move and always had their back to the play facing on. They were never in front of the ball. Scott Brown still wants to join in. I've heard even yourself, Paul, talking about how much he contributed to the goal at Tannadice. Didier Deschamps and Makalele would never have been involved in that position. So I see the team, it's 3 with 2 holding midfielders. We don't have a holding midfielder. We have guys who just play deeper line than the other ones. If you're going to do that, that's a totally separate position. And again, a guy made a point last week when I had said I thought Callum McGregor could do it in my team because his positional sense is that good. A guy made a comment on your social media platforms that when Xavi Alonso went into Liverpool, they were saying we're going to work on tackles, and it's like, I don't need to tackle because I'm that good in positions. So I think Callum McGregor could go to that level. So we just need to, it's wee tweaks with the team. We've got the ability, we've got the players. It's finding the correct formation and the players to fill that gap. Because even Jamesy, the much maligned James Forrest, I thought he had a poor game last night, and everybody raves about Jeremy Frimpong. Jeremy Frimpong looks more exciting than James Forrest. Is there any more end product of it, Jeremy Frimpong?
That's a great point. And the reason I say that is we did have quite a lot of contribution from Celtic by numbers who were looking at stats. And one of the big things I learned from Alan Morrison was the fact that as football fans who are casually watching a game for entertainment a lot of the time and getting so passionately involved in it, it's sometimes difficult to look at the fact that someone isn't actually contributing that well as a defender or as a forward. And his stats would suggest that Frimpong does things that you remember. But over a 90-minute period or maybe an hour period, if he's playing, his contribution isn't as great as someone like, let's say, James Forrest. And Callum McGregor, I think we've got a habit as fans, and I'm not criticising anyone, he's taking a lot of what he does for granted. Because if you then look at the stats, which are a massive part, the stats have always been a big part of football. We maybe didn't focus on them as much, but the stats that you look at Callum McGregor's performances, passes completed, for example, are astonishing. But sometimes he does it so consistently that he doesn't stand out. Frimpong does a wee jink and all of a sudden he's had a great game.
I'm a massive fan of Callum McGregor. I can't see by him. I think he's the best player at our club. But what I mean is, and Jeremy Frimpong looks exciting. James Forrest last night, by my opinion, had one of his more poor games. When Jeremy Frimpong scored the winner the way James Forrest did last night, I don't think he would. So James Forrest hasn't had a good game, contributes another really, really important goal to us.
Yeah. And he's done that so often, isn't he, James Forrest?
We go to Ryan Christie and again, Kevin at the weekend, it's a bad vibe. I don't contribute to the thing it's a bad vibe. I think Ryan Christie hasn't played as well. Last night, first half, he's created 2 great goals. He gets as a penalty. But there was loads of times last night, you're thinking, you should be much better than that if you're playing for Celtic Football Club. We want to take ourselves as a club to this great, great level. But you can't have that level of performances if you want to get there. And if he has aspirations of going to the English Premier League for one of these multi-million pound moves and getting the riches of the wages, he's going to have to be more consistent and better.
Within a game, never mind over a season. Because as you say there, first half sets up 2 goals, second half, the balls were all over the place a lot of the time, Steve.
First half world beater, second half panel beater.
Yeah. And I do think he does have aspirations. There's nothing wrong with that. I don't think, looking at Christie, people are looking at him and saying, and again, where is the basis of this? Oh, he's been selfish, he's playing for Ryan Christie. I hear that a hell of a lot about Christie, but he set up 2 goals and won a penalty last night, so he's done all right for Celtic last night,
I think when you're having these conversations that we're having on a show, the underlying thing is that we want what's best for our club and for every player to play how we want them to play. But if you're having a show like this, you've got to pick up the bits that's no going. If we're going to sit here and be sycophants and go, everything's great and we can't criticise anybody, the show's not going to last 5 minutes.
You're right. You've got to deconstruct it.
Say, at the end of the last night's performance, you've got the 3 points and it's magnificent. But you can't come away and go, by the way, see if we play the way we did on Saturday, it's going to be great. Because you'll lose on Saturday if we play that same way again. Yeah, we'll talk a wee bit about Livy as well. We've been speaking about them during the week as a result of the fact that Anthony Stokes won't be part of the setup this Saturday. Let's have a look at some of the comments. Jimbo2167, bring Paddy home. Whereas Helen McCallum, who is commenting on YouTube, says no, hasn't really done anything since he left Celtic. I think that's the only reason that we are even talking about this, because had he gone on and played the way that we felt his career was going to materialise, he wouldn't be quoted at Celtic, because he came in as this £12 million prodigy and he showed it first time round particularly. If he went on and continued that performance elsewhere, we wouldn't be talking about Paddy Roberts, because we wouldn't be able to purchase him. I think the fact that he's gone away, I'm not going to call him a failure. I mean, he's playing at a level, but he hasn't kicked on the way we expected. That's the reason we're talking about him as a potential signing, Stevie. But if you're talking about going to Norwich and Middlesbrough and Girona and getting less of the ball, they've not got very many creative midfielders. Norwich were constantly defending. Middlesbrough last year when he was there, fighting relegation. Paddy Roberts isn't going to be an asset to them. If you're playing for Celtic, and probably, and I'm just going to have a rough guess at this, our average possession in a game at Celtic Park domestically would be between 65 and 70% possession. Paddy Roberts is going to be on the ball so much more. And we can't forget the way he was getting us off the seats the first time he was at Celtic.
I know.
It was absolutely brilliant and refreshing to see. And at £2 million, and you've seen all these guys going out during the close season who didn't contribute anything for that sort of money. Paddy Roberts, I think, would be a no-brainer at that sort of money. If we were linked, we were always looking at, the speculation as part of the morning routine before we even speak on a Celtic State of Mind, and we're linked with various players. Celtic will always be linked with a lot of players. I've got to admit, my knowledge of world football is not what it used to be
Stevie, back when I used to get all the magazines. And there's names appear, and you then have to check out who they are, right? There might be some globally brilliant football fans out there who know. I know John Clark was famous for that. He knew everybody worldwide, and he subscribed to World Soccer and all this kind of stuff. So you're looking at an unknown quantity a lot of the time when you see a player who's linked to Celtic, and you're looking at them. Are they a player? Are they not? Do they have a good pedigree? We know what Paddy can do, and I think when you're looking at that £2 million figure, we've spent that so often on players. Some of them have worked, some of them have not. Is it a risk? Well, £2 million is always going to be a risk, but it's a calculated risk.
I think for Paddy Roberts, £2 million is a no-brainer.
Mm-hmm.
You know, if you're saying it's £5 million and he wants £40,000 a week,
yep.
I think maybe, he could maybe do better, you know, that would come in and hit the ground running. I don't think he would be a worry at £2 million.
No, I would agree with you. Gary Doonan, who contributes regularly to A Celtic State of Mind, welcome back via Facebook, Gary. He thinks, no, we shouldn't sign him. His time has gone and he seems to get better the longer he is away from us. He hardly played in his last season with us, which is now 3 years ago. But I think, had he gone on and played and had a bit of form, as you say, we wouldn't be having this conversation, because he would be out of the realms of Celtic actually buying him, because I don't think I would spend £5 million on Paddy Roberts at the moment. But if it's a £2-3 million deal, then I reckon he would improve the squad. I would then be looking to move on the likes of Tom Rodgick. There's got to be... We'll be looking at the Livingston squad on Saturday with interest in relation to Lee Griffiths. If he's not in against Livingston and he's fit, according to Neil Lennon, then I think his cards are marked.
But if you're Gary, and Gary makes great points on here, if you're going to spend £2 million on a winger and it's no Paddy Roberts, who would it be that you would trust to come in for £2 million and possibly have the same impact as what Paddy would have?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I mean, we bought, or we loaned again, El Yunusi, a player who, although I've been standing up for him, his consistency levels haven't been great this season, Stevie. He's coming on big wages. There'll be a loan fee to get him back from Southampton, I'm guessing, although that's never been confirmed. I'm sure there will be a loan fee. Would would you have put that money into Paddy Roberts? Would he be sitting on the bench against St Mirren and not getting a game? It's hard to say. You don't know how somebody's form is going to pan out. But I see that as much a risk as bringing El Yunusi back, and probably for the same cost.
I think El Yunusi's got a real touch of quality. Just that wee bit of class, like the nutmeg to set up Clamall at the weekend. If you can do that, then that's quality. I think the problem that we have at Celtic with El Yunusi is deciding where he's going to play and who's he going to get in front of. Because Neil has said to you before, Neil's one of his greatest attributes, and one of the things that trips him up more is his loyalty to players. Mm-hmm. He's going to have to be brave sometime and go, listen, he's not one of the regular guys, but I'm going to have to play him in his favoured position at the expense of one of these guys. Because if he sort of just plays to the left-hand side of your centre forward, I think he's a sensational player. Do you then start linking him up with a Yeti, but one of the regular guys who we would expect in the team has got to drop down to the bench?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was surprised that Yeti was on the bench, to be honest with you, because he's one of the guys, Stevie, who we're trying to get game time into his legs. We're trying to get him right up to speed. So far, he's looked like a quality player. I've seen a few Hammers fans on Twitter talking about a wee bit of regret that he's no longer down there. It's great that we've got him in on a permanent deal, but I would have expected, going back to your point that you mentioned there about the defensive partnership, we've been looking for a partner for Edouard. I mean, he was a lone striker for a huge part of last season. And I think when Griffiths came in, near the latter stages of the season, it was great for Edouard because he needed that partner. It then looked as though we found him a permanent one in Ayeti. Is he being rested? Perhaps. But I think at this stage, when his fitness has been called into question, he needs the minutes. He came on and it was hard for him to get involved. We asked our guest James McDonough, who's the manager of Edinburgh City, and he's done a great job there actually, about how difficult it would have been for the strikers last night. And he says it would have been hell of a difficult because, we were watching the game and there was absolutely no opportunity for the strikers to get involved. I felt that the St Mirren TV team were a bit harsh on Edouard. They said when he missed the penalty that it summed up his night. I seen Edward tracking back to try and get the ball. I seen him at left back at one point trying to get involved. So I just felt that him and Ajeti, there was signs there that we could get a partnership. I don't see that with him and Klimala.
Well, you start Klimala last night, and you know how St Mirren's going to line up against you. I would have thought Klimala's strengths would have been running in behind defences and pull guys. If they're defending on their own 18-yard box, there's no space.
Mm-hmm.
So last night, and again, he's only a young kid, Klimala, I didn't see what he contributed to the game, and I wouldn't have expected him to contribute with the way we had set up last night and the way I knew St Mirren were going to set up. I really couldn't understand why all these things with Neil, and Neil's forgot more about football than I'll ever know, why you would start Klimala with all the things that he said about he's no fit, we need game time. Mm-hmm. Why would you do it? If you're going to play him on Saturday when you're at home. The big wide spaces of Celtic Park, you know, and you can run into them. You're not going to be able to do it last night at St Mirren. I
was surprised with the amount of changes, and we've had a few comments in this broadcast saying there were too many changes. I'm always concerned when you make quite a few like that, Stevie, because it's all about getting into a groove so that, you know, the partnerships that we're speaking about, centre forward, centre half, we can start building on them. I did actually get a text message or a WhatsApp during the day from a good pal of mine whose name is synonymous with Celtic Football Club, telling me what he thought the lineup was going to be. I looked at it and thought, no chance. So when I've gone back to him and says, is this a leak? He says, no, it's just my opinion. He was one player off, or one position off. And he had Klimala starting as well, which I never thought was going to happen. I'm not giving the guy a hard time, but when you look at the level of investment that we've made in someone like Patrick Klimala, the Polish Paddy, I'd go for the other Paddy and bring him in for the same price, to be fair. Good, interesting point coming in from Facebook. Paddy Roberts needs a permanent home. His career has been too stop-start because of numerous loans. If it's financially viable and he's prepared to work to get back in, there's worse ideas out there. How important is that to a football player? We sometimes talk about them as they're just wee objects on a chessboard. I mean, sometimes it's all about them feeling like they belong somewhere.
We've seen in the past, and you know, some great players having a great career and then go somewhere for a big move and it doesn't work out, and then you go back there and it works great. We guys, was it Jesus Navas with Seville, went to Man City, busting a man's shot, go back there, and he's back to being a sensational footballer again. Sometimes there's clubs that just suit people, and sometimes people that just suit clubs.
Oh, definitely. And we suit Paddy. So I'm pretty sure we'll be talking about this until he signs for somebody else, which I hope doesn't happen. Now, I got a really great text this morning, right? And I'm no name dropping, right? Because John Fallon texted me this morning and said he'd have saved Edouard's penalty. Tongue in cheek, I'll be a bit disappointed with the penalty. Normally, Edouard's the coolest cucumber in the stadium, but it was quite weak, wasn't it?
Well, I heard one of your guests saying last night, you know, if the goalkeeper studied and done his work, all he'd have to do was watch the telly on Saturday. He'd have saved that. Just the exact same penalty. He didn't look up as he was going to strike the ball because the goalie's away before he's even kicked it, and he could have rolled into the other side. Bit nonchalant. Bit nonchalant, you know. When it works, it's great. Doesn't work, then you're leaving yourself open to a wee bit of criticism. And last night, I thought that was the way the penalty was taken.
It goes in. We're sitting here having won 3-1. It adds a bit of veneer of comfort to the actual scoreline, though, doesn't it? If you score that third goal,
I don't think that we were that far away from getting a few goals last night, and it makes it. But I think as Celtic fans, it's something we'll even say you win 5-0 at the weekend, we'll pick up a bit. What about that? And I think that's the way your club's always going to improve if you challenge things. You know, 4 changes for the weekend. Again, I'll never speak to Neil Lennon 1-to-1 because I'm nowhere anywhere near that sort of level of football. But I would love to know his reasons for making the changes last night.
I know it's a balance. I mean, again, going back to James McDonough last night, I utilised his expertise within, you know, managing a league club, and I was asking him questions such as, you know, how difficult is it for a big squad like that to manage? I mean, it must be it's a good headache for a manager, of course it is, but I just don't think the answer is, Stevie, making wholesale changes from week to week. Tweak it, you know, gives 1 or 2 guys a start, but, you know, making wholesale changes. Then there's the question of formation, and again, James, with his expertise, being on the front line within management in football, was speaking about, you can't have that fixed formation. And he was actually pointing out how Celtic were adapting within the game, not from game to game. So when we're attacking, this is how we were shaping up. When we were defending, this is how we were shaping up. And I think Celtic have got the personnel to do that.
But we interchange great at Celtic, especially in the midfield. But there was occasions last night where Ryan Christie and Callum McGregor on the right-hand side of the park within metres of each other. And it's great, the build-up, 1-2s. But there's nobody on the left. Mm-hmm. How many times last night did Shane Duffy attempt to pass the ball to the wee boy Taylor and sail the ball over his head?
Yeah.
Our distribution last night and passing accuracy was woeful. I'm going to use Kevin's word, woeful at times during that game last night.
He looked frustrated every time.
El Hamid must fucking try to pass the ball to James Forrest 4 times and kicked it out the park.
Now, El Hamid, I know he's a player you rate, and I rate him highly as well. A couple of times this season, he's been off the pace, isn't he? I didn't think he was great last night. I
think he might be a Enrico Annoni. And any time he went in against Laudrup in that man of the match, because he knew he had to concentrate. Getting into lesser games, as his concentration levels just dropping, but he thinks he's treating them a wee bit contemptuously. Mm-hmm.
People are going to think I'm a name dropper here now. Annoni, Enrico Annoni, speaking.
I know.
That's it. That's the boy. I was speaking to him last year. We were in this event in Dundee, and we were in this boozer. It can only be described as. And, it wasn't the worst pub in the world, but, it was a boozer. And when I was sitting waiting on Enrico arriving, I'm going to name drop again, I was sitting with Tosh McKinley, Stevie. And we're waiting on Enrico arriving, and we're getting told by the gentleman who is a good pal of mine, who's the promoter of this event, saying, Enrico doesn't speak great English. I'm thinking, well, we've got a boozer full of 120 Celtic fans who want to ask him questions here, so this might be interesting. Oh, but he's brought his interpreter. All right, from Italy. So we're sitting, Tosh and I are sitting having a wee chat. Tosh is a great guy. I think you would agree with that as well, Stevie. In walks Enrico with this beautiful looking girl from, it looks as though she just walked off a Milanese catwalk. It's his daughter who's the interpreter. And, where Tosh and I are sitting, you can actually smell the toilets, right? And the first thing she does is introduce herself. I'm saying, where's the toilet? I'm thinking, wow, she's just, in you go, check it out. Welcome to Dundee. And then she went. Enrico Annoni that night was speaking about how he could turn it on against the likes of Laudrup. And the way he explained it, Stevie, was he played in Serie A, and he played against Maradona, Ruud Gullit, Marco van Basten, Michael Laudrup, because we all know Brian Laudrup was the third best Laudrup in his house after his dad and his brother. No disrespect to him, because actually I think he was a classy guy. He says, and the man marking was a big part of Italian football. As we know, if you go back to the Catenaccio system of Inter Milan back in 67, defensively they were sound. So he had honed his man marking ability, in his words, against far better players than Laudrup. And when it came to playing Laudrup, he found it easy. Now, no disrespect to Brian Laudrup, but the proof was in the pudding there. He always performed well. But there's Enrico Annoni. And Enrico Annoni loves Celtic, loves motorbikes, and has a beautiful interpreter.
There you go. Him turn up at any event.
He's welcome back. He's welcome back anytime he wants. But that's how he played Laudrup. He says, his standard was there. So when he came up against Laudrup, no problem. And all the laughs were on Tosh McKinley that night, I've got to say. Tosh is a great guy as well.
But the Italians brought something to this country when they came. They really had something about them. The Italians that we signed really added to our club. Again, their politics later on, are something that you wouldn't agree with. But player-wise, they certainly added to the club.
When you think of that period, not just Celtic, I remember Hearts bringing in Bruno, and Rangers signed a few Italians as well. And at that time, it shouldn't have been a surprise to us, because there's such an Italian foothold in Glasgow. When you look at Glasgow and you go to the people who have come over generations ago and made Glasgow their home, I think it was good. And Jim Watt, your pal, obviously befriended quite a lot of a lot of the Celtic and Rangers players, to be fair. But the big thing with the Canio for me was there's always that strange dichotomy between the talent you saw in the park for Celtic and the politics that the man had. Now, that's always going to be an issue for Celtic fans, isn't it? And I would love to ask him someday about his politics. How could someone actually believe in what he believes in terms of his political ideals, Stevie? I'd love to question him about that.
If you think of the player, Di Canio was brought in at Napoli to replace Diego Maradona.
Mm-hmm.
Then we sign him. You know, he was an absolute genius. You know, as an interviewer, it would be a great interview. Again, probably the Celtic fans would be up in arms. You can't speak to this man. But how do you get to the bottom of it if you don't ask him?
I know.
You know, if you've got a free society, which we all wish to live in, then you've got to be allowed to ask these people. You're never going to agree with the things they say, but you need to ask the question.
Oh, definitely. You need to ask the question. And I think the big problem Celtic have, obviously Celtic as a club would never have anything to do with Paolo Di Canio, but we have already had plenty to do with him. And that was after he had already made his political feelings known. I mean, he came and played in the Tommy Burns game. That was a long time after he'd made his political feelings known. I mean, when we signed him, he had already made his political feelings known as a young player at Lazio. So we're already, unfortunately, he's already part of our history. And I say unfortunately because it doesn't fit our ideals from a political standpoint.
But where do you be allowed to draw the line that you wouldn't sign a player for? Who makes that decision? Is it somebody that's been an ex-offender who's been rehabilitated?
Yeah. You
can't sign him because it seemed he was younger. Wait to tell you what he done. And the guy could be one of the greatest talent. Are you going to hold that back? Does the offence come into it? So is it a political persuasion? Is it a religious persuasion?
Yeah.
An ideal? How do Celtic fans get to the decision where he's no for our club?
Mm-hmm. I think the political thing's massive for Celtic fans, isn't it? I mean, we were talking yesterday to James McDonough, who's got a player in his team who was infamously convicted of the sexual offences when he was at Hearts. He now plays for Edinburgh City. He's a captain. We had Neil Lennon in 2 weeks ago, who has David Goodwillie and Ali Love in his squad. So clubs can overlook indiscretions beyond what they've done if they think they're going to get the player. That's what happens. Not all clubs. There's plenty of clubs out there who would look at sponsorship as being an issue because certain sponsors would pull out as soon as you sign someone who's been convicted of specific offences. Celtic fans have got an issue with politics, of course they do. Because that, for me, the club goes hand in hand with politics. And that's why I always find it interesting when people say, your football and politics don't mix. Well, take the politics away. Would Celtic even be here?
I would never ask the Celtic fans to take their politics away from the football.
Yeah.
I agree with you 100%. It goes hand in hand.
Yeah.
But does they sometimes expect their own behaviour, which isn't acceptable all the time, to go with the players, or are the players held to a higher account than what the fans are, who are holding them to that account? Because I've been in loads of occasions where I think, if you videoed that and showed that guy how he behaved, especially in some of the away European trips, they would deny it was them.
Yeah.
You know, but so the players, and again, we do hold them to account, but would you stop signing something? What would be the level where you'd stop signing a great player for your club because of something that happened off the park?
Mm-hmm. Well, the big issue I had with the Di Canio thing is I did want to ask him questions, and we did have that interview lined up. It didn't happen. It was made public. The reasons that were actually made public weren't accurate as to why it didn't happen, but I can't get into that because there's a legal wrangle around it. But some of the people who are most vehemently opposing it and criticising me for agreeing to interview him are 90-minute revolutionaries, Stevie, or Twitter revolutionaries. They don't live their life the way that they put themselves out there. So they're going on about a political ideal or a way that we live our day-to-day lives in relation to respecting certain factions of the community. I know for a fact some of the people that were critical of me are not the people that they, propose to be behind this avatar. So you've got to be true to yourself. Why was I prepared to interview Paolo Di Canio? So I could challenge him. And I think you've always got to challenge things that you don't agree with, things sometimes that you don't even understand. I can't understand why Paolo Di Canio would have such political ideals. So, given the opportunity, I would speak to him again.
But you had a magnificent interview with John Barnes,
yeah,
which I listened to intently, and I've re-listened to it 2 or 3 times since you've done it. Some of the things that he said, I would never agree with. But some of the things that he said, I did resonate with me.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't say that you should never have that interview because I disagree with some of his answers.
Yeah.
Because then you would never get his point of view. And maybe for his point of view, it was to make it a discussion point.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're now even before the games and you're seeing the things with Black Lives Matter. Now, I've spoken to loads of people who I really like who totally disagree with that movement. But I can't change their mind or try and convince them otherwise. Racism's wrong in any shape or form, but how long are we going to continue with that? Because there's loads of things happening in the world that we don't take action about. So you can go into debates and political debates and what's right and what's wrong till you're blue in the face.
Mm-hmm.
But we can't always be the moral guardians of the world. One
thing about the John Barnes interview, what happens in this environment, Stevie, is you and I are putting ourselves up or next on the chopping block. If we say something that people disagree with, we can be criticised. It's going to happen. We can be criticised by the Celtic fans tuning in. I'm happy with that. Absolutely happy to deal with any engagement. People disagreeing with me. You also find yourself on Rangers forums getting completely obliterated. And again, I don't check them, but I've been told, and I wouldn't go into them. But the thing with the John Barnes interview, it was a challenging interview, to be fair, but just to give you a wee bit more of a kind of light-hearted nature to that particular story, we're talking about unconscious bias for 90 minutes, or for maybe an hour, and then the Celtic stuff happened at the end, which I found really interesting. Unconscious bias. And at that time, I, and still am obviously, in touch with Saul Davis from James, and we were talking about a few things that Saul's doing from an anti-discrimination perspective, you know, through music and that. And he had asked me to pitch the idea to John Barnes, because he knew I was interviewing him the following week. So after the interview was finished, I'm chatting to John, and I say, I'm trying to introduce the idea of James, the band James, to John Barnes. And it's quite clear he's got no idea who James are. And I'm saying, you know, they had a massive hit with Sit Down back in the 90s. Nah, no my type of music, Paul. I'm more into Dr. Dre. And I said, oh, so am I. The Chronic's a great album. And he raised his eyebrows as if to say, oh, I'm surprised at that. And we've just been talking about unconscious bias. Does that mean I can't listen to Dre? So that was the funny side of it. What I found after that was I had a lot of people saying to me, listen, see, during it, I disagreed with John Barnes, but see, now that I've thought about what he's been saying, a lot of it, it's made me question my perception of certain people, certain environments, certain situations. Now, if that was John's intention by speaking to me, I think it's worth it, an absolute treat.
I think there's, excuse me, there's people of a certain generation, my generation's one of them, that because of the way we were brought up and the environment we were brought up, we would probably, most of us have that. Most of us have used some derogatory terms, which would be derogatory now, but they were part and parcel of your everyday life and up Brecon, when you know that the local Asian shop and how it was described, you know, and the gentleman who was in our shop, we referred to him as Peter. Now, there's probably never been a Muslim called Peter in his life, but that was a sort of a term endearment from the community to this guy, but now it would be totally unacceptable. So if you're coming through that, there probably is an unconscious bias somewhere that you're not aware of until it manifests itself.
But then, you know, people can educate, people can learn, people can unlearn, but sometimes is more important than learning, Stevie. And I think that if you do come from a generation, like my parents' generation and their parents' generation, they are entering a different type of world now, and it's fine to relearn and unlearn what was previously acceptable. Actually, it was never acceptable. It went unchallenged before, didn't it? And now we're opening people's eyes and minds up to a different way to look at this. But the John Barnes interview was probably controversial to a degree. There was a part in it. There was a part in that interview, because it didn't go out live, although John wanted it to go out live, where he named a few people and he said a few things that were very controversial, and he decided at the end of the interview to remove it. Now, that would have made it even more controversial, right? I had to obviously obey that, and I had to respect his wishes. But people need to realise that it's easy for then, after the Barnes interview to come out, other people to attach themselves to that story and say, I'll give you the true story. Barnes was respectful enough to tone down a few points that he made during that interview about his time at Celtic.
The bit that disappointed me from his point of view was, I've got good friends in Liverpool, and when John Barnes signed for Liverpool, the racism directed towards John Barnes from the Kop was incredible.
Yeah.
But he still doesn't bring that up. You know, the whole of the Kop was daubed with racist chants.
Yeah.
You know, 6 feet wide paintings. You know, how does he not bring that out? Why was it only against Celtic? You know, and again, you can get his managerial capabilities, which is a different subject. He was rotten. You know, as is proven everywhere else he went. You know, and he go brought up. You know, he was in charge of Jamaica. Surely be the unconscious bias there.
Well, if you accept the honour, in inverted commas, to become a member of the British Empire, then let's look at what the British Empire has done in relation to their own issues with race over the years, Stevie. And that's a big talking point as well. That's a podcast in itself. And believe it or not, and I'm going to announce it here, I've been approached by someone who's making a documentary and asked if I would do that with John Barnes. So there might be a second round on that interview, Stevie.
I think it would be great, Paul. I said it before, I'm never blowing smoke up your jacksie, but I think you're the ideal guy to do it because you've got a real calm demeanour about you and you continue to flow these discussions. So if you get offered it, do it.
Now, everybody who's joined us, thank you again for joining us on A Celtic State of Mind. We'll be back again at 12:30 tomorrow. The only thing that's left for me to say is, Stevie Mullen, thank you very much for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Thank you, Paul.